Hello students, welcome to video lesson 9.6. We're going to do two videos for this section. The first is going to be basically how does the quadratic formula work as a way to solve quadratic equations. And the next will be sort of a summary of what we've talked about and just some shortcuts to help us get closer to the answers. So if we talk first here about what is the quadratic formula and why do we need it, okay? We've been solving quadratic equations so far in chapter 9, either by finding square roots or by factoring, right? So there are a lot of quadratic equations that simply cannot be factored. For example, if you have x squared plus 3x plus 15. This is a quadratic equation that cannot be factored. Okay, there's no two numbers that multiply to make 15 and add together to make 3, right? 1 and 15, 3 and 5, they don't add up to be 3. So this can't be factored. Now in previous videos, when we ran into something like this, we just wrote can't be factored, okay? But now we're going to talk about how can we actually find the solutions for a quadratic equation that can't be factored and that we can't just undo things. Because remember, we see the x variable 2 different times here, and so that means we can't just undo stuff. If we don't see this x term here, then we can just undo things in square root and sort of go with that. But in this case, we can't do square roots. We can't just get the x by itself, and we can't factor. So we have to have another way to solve the equation. And the way we do that is something called the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is sort of a complicated looking formula. Okay, it's right here. And this whole formula is going to tell me the two x values or the two solutions to the equation. Okay, so it's important, it's actually crucial before we use the quadratic formula to make sure that our equation is in this sort of form right here, okay? ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, okay? We need it to be equal to 0. We need it to be in standard form, x squared first, and then the x term, and then the number, okay? The number in front of x squared is what we're gonna call a. The number in front of the x is what we'll call b, and the number at the end with no x's on it is what we call c. This formula then is going to tell us the x values. We just plug in the a, b, and c values into the formula, and it will tell us what our two possible solutions are. Okay. So the formula, if if I just read it out to you, it says the opposite of b or negative b. So basically that means if the b value is currently like positive 3, we flip it to negative. If it's negative 7, we flip it to positive. So the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. We do all that math and then divide that answer by 2 times the a value. Okay? So here they show us an example, and we'll sort of go through the math here with the example that they give us. So they have the equation 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equal to 0. So their a value is 2, their b value is 3, and their c value is a minus 5. The minus stays with that number and it becomes a negative 5 here, okay? So if we plug these values, a, b, and c, into the quadratic equation, or excuse me, into the quadratic formula, we see this, okay? It's negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, and now under here we have some math we need to do, right? We need to do 3 squared, that's 9, minus 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times a negative 5, 8 times negative 5 would make negative 40, okay? And then it's all, of course, divided by 2 times the a value was 2, so 2 times 2 on the bottom is 4. So if I keep going with my math up here, right now what it says is, and by the way, this is of course x equals this stuff. x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of, and now let's do what's underneath the square root. 9 minus -40. Minus -40 is like plus positive 40. 9 plus 40 makes 49. Okay, and divide by 4. So now I know that the square root of 49 is 7. So I'm going to put that there. And I want to point out to you guys why this formula gives us both of the answers. Remember that most quadratic equations have 2 answers, or maybe no solutions, and we'll get to one of those later. But in this case, we have 2 solutions, and the 2 solutions come from this symbol right here. Okay, this symbol right here says plus or minus. So this is really 2 equations in one. Okay, and what I'm going to do now that I've done all the math for underneath the square root and stuff, I'm actually going to split this up into 2 different equations. One of them is going to have a plus sign. The other one is going to have a minus sign. So what I do is I say x equals -3 plus 7 divided by 4. And then I say x equals -3 minus 7 divided by 4. Okay, and that just comes from this plus minus symbol splitting up into plus and minus. Okay, now I can do math. -3 plus 7 is 4. So this says x equals, well, let's see, 4 divided by 4, x equals 1. And then this one, x equals -10 over 4, which can be simplified to -5 over 2. Okay, so I end up with these 2 values for x. X equals 1, x equals -5 over 2. Now, a lot of times when we do the quadratic formula, we're going to have to use a calculator to do square roots. Okay, we're going to have to use a calculator to do square roots because it's not just going to come out super nice. Like this one, the square root of 49 was a really nice answer. Most of the time, what's under that square root is not going to come out really nice. Okay, so let's look at this example here, and we'll see just another example of the quadratic formula, and we'll see if we have to do a square root of some number that doesn't work out so nicely. So this one says, what are the solutions of x squared minus 8 is equal to 2x? Okay, now this one, again, it's a quadratic equation, and I do see another x over here. So that tells me I can't just, plus 8 and then square root to find my values of x. I'm going to have to get this into standard form, which means I need it to equal 0. So what I have to do is I have to take this 2x here, and I have to minus it away to the other side, so that 2x minus 2x that side now says 0. So now this side says x squared, and then I'm going to put the minus 2x here that I need to obviously put in there, because I have to do whatever I do on one side, I have to do also to the other side. And then minus 8 is equal to 0. Okay, so now this quadratic equation, I am going to try to use the quadratic formula for this. Okay, so I first identify my A's, B's, and C's. A in this case is the number in front of x squared, which is now just a 1. The B value is -2, and the C value is -8. If I put this stuff into the quadratic formula, it says -2, right? Negative B value, and the B value is already negative, so in a second that'll flip to positive, plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, so that's not going to do anything, times C, which is -8. Okay, and once I do all of that math, I'm going to divide the whole thing by 2 times my A value. 2 times 1, that's just dividing by 2. Okay, so now I'm going to do my math. And again, this is what my x value equals. Okay, these are the solutions. This formula is going to tell me the solutions. So if I look at this first part, -2 just flips to +2. So it's 2 plus or minus, and then under the square root, -2 squared is 4, minus 4 times 1 is 4 times -8 is -32, minus -32. So what's 4 minus -32? Well, that's plus +32, so that's 36. Square root of 36 is going to be divided by 2. Okay, so that's what x equals. Now, I know that the square root of 36 is 6, so this is another one that came out really nice. Okay, but if, for example, it said the square root of 38, that's not something I know real nice, so I'm going to have to do that on a calculator, and I'm going to have to do it on a calculator and get my decimal approximation there, 6.1644. In this case, it's just 6. So my answers become, let's see, I'll go over here. X equals 2 plus 6 divided by 2, and x equals 2 minus 6 divided by 2. Well, this becomes 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. X equals 4. This one here, 2 minus 6 is negative 4. Divided by 2 is negative 2. So I get this, negative 2. Okay, so I get these two answers from the quadratic formula. Now, one other thing that I will tell you guys, when you are doing the quadratic formula, if what's under the square root comes out as a number that you can square root really nicely, like 9 or 16 or 25 or 36 or 49, that indicates that we could actually factor the original quadratic equation. Okay, this one up here can be factored. X squared minus 2x minus 8 can actually be factored into x minus 4 and x plus 2, right? Because two numbers multiply to negative 8 and add up to negative 2. But you never have to factor. Okay, you can always use the quadratic formula every time. But it is a more complicated process, I think, than the factoring. So just be aware of that. All right. Now, let's see what I can do here. I'm going to change this equation slightly so I can show you a little bit different example. So if I were to try to find the solutions for x squared plus 4x plus 21 equals 0. Okay, if I want to find the solutions to this equation using the quadratic formula, I'm going to first identify, of course, my a, b, and c. A is equal to 1, b is equal to 4, c is equal to 21. And I'm going to plug this into the quadratic formula, and you're going to see something a little bit interesting happen here. If I plug this in, I get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 21, and then that's all going to get divided by 2 times 1. So most of this is pretty straightforward. The bottom, of course, is 2. The top says negative 4, and then it's plus or minus the square root of, let's figure out what the square root here is. 4 squared, which is the first thing in there, is 16, and then minus 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 21 is 84. So 16 minus 84 is going to equal negative 68, I believe. So this is plus or minus the square root of negative 68. Now 68 is not a number that we know the square root of very nicely, so I'm going to use my calculator. I'm going to go square root negative 68, and it says this. It says domain error. Okay, domain error. Why does it say domain error? Well, because I'm trying to square root a negative 68, right? I'm trying to square root a negative number, which I'm not allowed to do. So as soon as you see this, we know immediately that this equation has no real solutions. Okay, it has no real solutions. So that's what we would say here. This is one of those examples of quadratic equations that have no solutions. And we know that because I can't square root a negative, so there's nothing else I can do here. That sort of idea is going to come up more in our next video. But that's all I have for you in this one. If you have questions at all about the quadratic formula, where any of the numbers come from, or what order we need to do the math in, I always start under the square root, do the square root, then that number in front plus that, the number in front minus that, and so on. If you have questions about that or need any help, I would be happy to help. Just reach out to me and let me know. Otherwise, that's all I have for you, and we'll talk to you soon.